The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, changing everything. Catherine Porter stood in the hallway of her aunt's Boston townhouse, her hands trembling as she read the words that would upend her carefully planned future. Father deceased. Stop debts substantial. Stop creditors seizing assets. Stop return immediately. Stop. Her father, the respected physician Dr. James Porter, was gone, and apparently so was everything else. The comfortable life she'd known, the social standing her family had maintained for 3 generations, the security she'd taken for granted, all of it crumbling in 12 terse words transmitted across telegraph wires. What happened next would take Catherine from Boston's elite social circles to the rugged territory of Wyoming, from a woman who had never made a single decision for herself, to someone who would choose love over wealth, dignity over comfort, and a one-armed rancher over the richest man in 3 counties. But first, she had to survive the fall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine took the next train west, her traveling trunk filled with silk dresses and kid leather gloves, possessions that would soon prove utterly useless for the life awaiting her. The journey from Boston to Laramie took 4 days, each mile carrying her further from everything familiar. She arrived to find her childhood home, a modest but respectable house on Maple Street, stripped nearly bare. Her father's medical practice had been sold to cover some debts. The furniture, the silver, her mother's china, all auctioned off. What remained were personal items the creditors deemed worthless. Her father's medical journals, family photographs, her mother's wedding dress carefully preserved in a cedar chest. Samuel Hartley, her father's attorney, met her in what had been the parlor, now empty, except for 2 chairs the creditors had overlooked. He was a thin man in his 50s, his face lined with the discomfort of delivering bad news. "Your father made some unfortunate investments," Samuel began, his voice gentle but firm. "Railroad stocks that failed, a mining venture in Colorado that never produced, loans to colleagues who couldn't repay. By the time he passed, the debts totaled nearly $15,000. Catherine's breath caught. 15,000 was an impossible sum. "Everything has been sold," Samuel continued. "The house, the practice, the contents. After settling with creditors, there's approximately $200 remaining. I've held it in trust for your return." $200! Catherine's quarterly allowance from her father had been more than that. "I have some options to present," Samuel said, pulling papers from his leather case. "Your aunt in Boston has written. She's willing to take you back as a companion. The position would include room and board, but no salary. She's quite explicit that she cannot afford to support you as a dependent indefinitely." Catherine knew what that meant. Her Aunt Eleanor was a widow of limited means who had already stretched her resources, thin hosting Catherine for the past 2 years while she finished her education in Boston society. Returning as a charity case would mean a life of grateful servitude, forever indebted, forever reminded of her reduced circumstances. There's also a teaching position available in a settlement called Bright River, about 40 miles north of here. The school board is desperate for an educated teacher. They're offering $30 a month plus room and board. $30 a month. Less than what Catherine spent on gloves and ribbons in Boston, but it was independence of a sort. "And there's a third option." Samuel's expression grew uncomfortable. "Walter Kingsley has made an offer." Catherine's spine stiffened. Walter Kingsley owned the First Territorial Bank, half the commercial buildings in Laramie, and held mortgages on most of the ranches in the county. He was 52 years old, twice widowed, and had been pursuing Catherine with increasingly bold attention since her return. What kind of offer? Marriage. He's proposing to assume all remaining debts associated with your father's estate. There are still some contested claims that could technically be pursued against you as heir. In exchange, you would become his wife. He's prepared to sign a contract guaranteeing you an annual allowance of $500 for personal expenses, plus full management of his household. It was a business proposition dressed in the language of matrimony. Walter Kingsley wanted a young, educated wife to grace his table and bear his name. In exchange, he would erase her debts and provide financial security. He's been quite persistent in pressing his suit, Samuel added. He's given you 1 week to decide. After that, he says the offer expires and he'll pursue other options. Catherine stood and walked to the window, overlooking the street where she'd played as a child. Laramie had grown in the years she'd been away, new buildings rising, more people crowding the wooden sidewalks. But it was still rough territory, still a place where survival mattered more than propriety. I need time to think. Of course, but Catherine, Samuel's voice held genuine concern. Your options are limited. Women in your position don't have the luxury of romantic notions. Kingsley's offer is generous, more generous than you're likely to receive elsewhere. A week isn't long. After Samuel left, Catherine sat alone in the empty house as shadows lengthened across bare floors. 3 choices, none of them what she'd imagined for her life. Return to Boston as her aunt's unpaid companion. Take a teaching position in some remote settlement, or marry Walter Kingsley and secure her future through a loveless but financially stable union. She thought about the last time she'd seen Walter Kingsley at a reception following her father's funeral. He'd cornered her near the refreshment table, his hand possessive on her elbow, his breath smelling of whiskey and cigars. You'll need protection now, he'd said, his voice low. A woman alone, without resources. It's a hard world, Catherine, but it doesn't have to be. I can provide everything you need, everything your father would have wanted for you. His thumb had stroked her arm through the black mourning dress, the gesture meant to seem comforting but feeling invasive. His eyes had traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, assessing, calculating, already claiming ownership. She'd extracted herself politely, but the memory lingered. Marriage to Walter Kingsley would mean financial security, yes, but it would also mean submitting to his touch, his authority, his possession. It would mean a lifetime of being grateful for his generosity, forever reminded that he'd rescued her from poverty. The teaching position seemed like the better choice. At least there she'd maintain some autonomy, some dignity. $30 a month wasn't wealth, but it was honest wages for honest work. That evening, Catherine walked through Laramie's commercial district, trying to see the town with fresh eyes. She passed Kingsley's Bank, an imposing brick building that dominated the corner of 3rd and Main. Through the windows, she could see Walter himself, standing behind the massive oak desk in his private office, speaking with a cowhand who twisted his hat nervously in work-roughened hands. She watched Walter's face, the cold calculation in his expression as he discussed whatever business had brought the cowhand to his door. When the man left, shoulders slumped with defeat, Walter called his assistant in and said something that made the younger man laugh. The casual cruelty in that laughter, the enjoyment of another man's misfortune, told Catherine everything she needed to know about what kind of husband Walter Kingsley would be. She continued walking, reaching the edge of town where buildings gave way to open range. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the mountains dark silhouettes against the fading light. Wyoming was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, so different from Boston's cultivated gardens and tree-lined streets. A rider approached from the western range, moving at an easy lope. As he drew closer, Catherine noticed something unusual. The man rode with his reins held in his left hand only, his right arm ending just below the elbow. Despite the disability, he sat his horse with unconscious grace, man and animal moving as one unit. He slowed as he neared the edge of town, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. When he noticed Catherine standing there, he touched his hat brim with his left hand in polite acknowledgement. "Evening, ma'am." Catherine nodded, studying him with curiosity she hoped wasn't rude. He was perhaps 30 years old, his face weathered from outdoor work, his eyes a startling blue in a tanned face. There was something solid about him, something steady in the way he sat his horse and met her gaze without either presumption or servility. "Beautiful sunset," he offered, following her gaze toward the mountains. "Yes, it is." "You're Dr. Porter's daughter, aren't you? I heard you'd returned. I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Set my arm when I broke it falling off a green horse about 5 years back. Wouldn't take payment because he said I'd helped his wife carry groceries once when she was having trouble. That kind of decency is rare." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at this casual testimony to her father's character. "Thank you, that sounds like him." The man shifted in his saddle, seeming about to speak again, then thinking better of it. He touched his hat brim once more. "Well, I won't keep you. Evening, ma'am." He rode on toward the livery stable, and Catherine watched him go, noticing the way other people on the street greeted him with genuine warmth. Whatever else he might be, he was clearly well liked. She made her way back to the empty house as full darkness fell, her mind no clearer about what choice to make. Sleep came slowly, and her dreams were troubled, filled with images of Walter Kingsley's possessive hands and empty rooms that echoed with loneliness. The next morning brought a visitor. Catherine answered the knock to find a woman in her 40s standing on the porch, a basket over her arm and a determined expression on her face. "Catherine Porter, I'm Helen Crawford. I run the general store with my husband. I knew your mother years ago before she passed. May I come in?" Catherine stepped aside, acutely aware of the house's bare condition. Helen noticed but didn't comment, simply setting her basket on the floor and pulling out supplies: bread, cheese, preserves, coffee. "Figured you might need some provisions, what with everything being sold off. Don't argue, it's already done." They sat in the empty parlor, Helen on one chair, Catherine on the other, sharing bread and cheese and coffee Helen had somehow thought to bring already brewed in a jar. "I heard about Kingsley's offer," Helen said without preamble. "Word travels fast in a town this size. I wanted to talk to you before you made any decisions." Catherine's cheeks heated. "I don't think my personal affairs—" "Your personal affairs become everyone's business when they involve Walter Kingsley." Helen's voice was firm. "That man has caused enough misery in this territory. He's foreclosed on half the ranches within 50 miles, bought properties for pennies on the dollar when families were desperate, charged interest rates that should be criminal. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, fell down the stairs, they said, but she'd been seen with bruises before. His second wife lasted 3 years before consumption took her, but folks say it was misery that actually killed her. She was never allowed to leave the house without his permission, never allowed to visit friends, never allowed to make a single decision without his approval." Catherine's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I appreciate the warning, but my options are limited. I know about the teaching position in Bright River." Helen leaned forward. "I also know about another option you haven't considered. There's a rancher about 20 miles north of here, Thomas Bennett. Good man, runs a small operation by himself mostly. Lost his arm in the war, came west afterward to start fresh. He's been looking for a wife, not for romance, mind you, but for practical partnership. Someone to help with the house, the cooking, managing supplies. He'd offer fair wages, respectful treatment, and honest work. It's not glamorous, but it's decent." Catherine thought about the one-armed rider from the evening before, the easy way he'd sat his horse, the genuine warmth in people's greetings. I think I saw him yesterday. Rides a bay horse. That's Thomas. He comes to town once a week for supplies, sometimes to help neighbors with heavy work they can't manage. Never asks for anything in return, just does it because it needs doing. Helen paused. He's been alone on that ranch for 5 years now, makes do with what he can manage one-handed, hires day workers when he needs extra help, but he's struggling. Pride won't let him admit it, but everyone can see. A partnership with someone capable, someone educated who could handle the bookkeeping and planning, that could make all the difference. You're suggesting I marry a man I've never met rather than teach school or return to Boston? I'm suggesting you consider all your options, including ones that might not have occurred to you. Helen stood, gathering the empty jar. Thomas Bennett is a good man. He'd treat you with respect, give you meaningful work, and never make you feel like you owed him anything beyond honest partnership. That's more than Walter Kingsley would ever offer, no matter how much money he has. After Helen left, Catherine sat alone with her thoughts. A partnership marriage to a one-armed rancher she'd exchanged 3 sentences with. It seemed absurd, the kind of desperate solution women in dime novels accepted when they had nowhere else to turn. But was it really more absurd than marrying Walter Kingsley for his money, or returning to Boston to be her aunt's unpaid companion, or teaching in a remote settlement where she'd be completely alone? That afternoon, Catherine walked to the general store. Helen looked up from the counter with knowing eyes. How would I even approach him about this? Catherine asked without preamble. Helen smiled. Leave that to me. Thomas comes to town tomorrow for supplies. I'll mention that you're looking for a position. See if he's interested in discussing possibilities. If he is, you two can talk and decide if it makes sense for both of you. No pressure. No obligations, just a conversation between 2 practical people about a practical arrangement. Catherine nodded slowly. All right, I'll consider it. Good, because Walter Kingsley is circling like a vulture, and you deserve better than being picked over by a man who sees you as property to acquire. The next day, Catherine waited in the general store's back room while Helen spoke with Thomas Bennett. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of conversation. Dr. Porter's daughter, looking for a position, capable woman, educated, might be interested in a partnership arrangement. Thomas's voice was low, harder to hear, but his tone was thoughtful, measured, considering rather than dismissing outright. Finally, Helen appeared at the back room door. He'd like to speak with you. I'll leave you 2 alone, but I'll be right outside if you need anything. Catherine stepped into the store's main room. Thomas Bennett stood near the counter, his hat in his hand, his left hand, his expression serious but not unwelcoming. Up close, she could see the care he took with his appearance, his clothes clean if worn, his face freshly shaved, his hair recently cut. Miss Porter, Helen says you might be interested in discussing a partnership arrangement. I am, though I confess I'm not entirely sure what that would entail. Honest work for honest wages, basically. Thomas's voice was steady, matter of fact. I run a small ranch, about 500 acres, maybe 200 head of cattle. It's manageable for one person, barely. But there's work I struggle with one-handed. Bookkeeping, inventory, correspondence with buyers, meal preparation, garden maintenance, handling supplies. The kind of work that needs doing but competes with the physical labor I can't delegate. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm proposing a business arrangement, not a romantic one. You'd have your own quarters, your own space. I'd pay you $35 a month, 5 more than the teaching position, plus room and board. You'd handle the household management and paperwork. I'd handle the physical ranch work. We'd be partners in running the operation, nothing more. If after 6 months either of us is unhappy with the arrangement, we part ways with no hard feelings. You'd have saved enough wages to have real options by then." Catherine studied him, this man who spoke of partnership with such careful respect, who offered her autonomy and fair wages and honest work. Why not simply hire someone for these tasks? Because it needs to be someone who understands the whole operation, who can make decisions when I'm out working cattle, who has a stake in things running smoothly. Thomas met her eyes directly. "And because Helen suggested you might prefer an arrangement that didn't require returning to Boston as dependent family, teaching in isolation, or marrying Walter Kingsley." Heat flooded Catherine's cheeks. "She told you about his offer?" "She mentioned it was one of your options. I know Kingsley. Most ranchers around here do. He holds mortgages on half of us, looks for any excuse to foreclose. A partnership with me won't give you his wealth or his social position, but it will give you honest treatment and fair dealing. That's worth something." It was worth everything. Catherine realized with sudden clarity that she'd rather scrub floors and manage inventory for this straightforward one-armed rancher than wear silk dresses and preside over Walter Kingsley's table as a purchased possession. "I'd like to see the ranch before I decide. Would that be possible?" "Course. I'm heading back tomorrow morning. You're welcome to ride out with me, look the place over, see if it seems workable to you. If not, no harm done." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two strangers contemplating a partnership neither had imagined a week ago. "Tomorrow, then," Catherine said. "What time?" "Dawn. I'll meet you in front of Helen's store with an extra horse. Dress practical. It's a 2-hour ride over rough country." He settled his hat on his head with his left hand, the gesture now familiar, and left without further conversation. Through the window, Catherine watched him load supplies into his wagon with efficient, one-handed movements that spoke of years of adaptation. Helen emerged from the back room. "Well, I'm going to see the ranch tomorrow. After that, I'll decide." "Smart woman. Make sure you look at everything, not just the house and barn, but how he treats his animals, how he's organized his work. That'll tell you everything you need to know about what kind of man he is." That evening, Catherine sorted through what remained of her possessions, setting aside the silk dresses and delicate shoes that would be useless on a working ranch. She packed practical items in a small travel bag: sturdy boots, simple dresses, her mother's wedding ring which she wore on a chain around her neck. She thought about Thomas Bennett's careful offer, the respect in how he'd presented it, the honesty of calling it a business arrangement rather than dressing it up as something romantic. She thought about Walter Kingsley's possessive hands and cold eyes. The choice seemed obvious, but fear still whispered its doubts. What if she couldn't manage ranch work? What if she failed at this partnership and ended up with nothing? But staying in Laramie meant certain failure, either as Kingsley's purchased wife or drowning in debts she couldn't repay. At least with Thomas Bennett, she'd have a chance to prove herself capable of something more than decorating a parlor and pouring tea. Tomorrow she would ride north into unfamiliar territory and decide whether to trust a one-armed rancher with her future. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but then again, nothing about the past 2 weeks had gone according to plan. Sometimes survival meant letting go of what you'd imagined and reaching for what was actually possible. Catherine was beginning to understand that the hard way. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke cold and clear over Laramie, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Catherine stood outside the general store wearing the most practical dress she owned, a dark blue calico that had been her traveling dress, and the sturdy boots she'd worn for country walks in Boston. They seemed laughably inadequate now for what lay ahead. Thomas Bennett arrived precisely at sunrise, leading a gentle-looking mare alongside his own bay gelding. He dismounted with practiced ease, using his left hand to manage the reins and his body weight to swing down smoothly. "Morning, Miss Porter. This is Daisy." She's calm and steady, good for someone who hasn't ridden much recently. Catherine approached the mare, who regarded her with large, patient eyes. "I should tell you, I haven't ridden since I was 14. My father thought it unladylike for young women to ride astride." "Well, you'll learn today. Can't get to the ranch any other way." Thomas showed her how to mount, his instruction clear and patient. "Left foot in the stirrup, grip the saddle horn, swing your right leg over. Don't worry about looking graceful. Worry about staying on." It took 3 attempts, but Catherine finally settled into the saddle, her legs straddling the horse in a way that would have scandalized Boston society. The height was dizzying, the leather saddle unfamiliar beneath her. "Hold the reins loose. Daisy will follow my horse. If you need to stop, pull back gentle. If you start sliding, grab the horn and call out. I'll hear you." Thomas swung onto his own horse with fluid efficiency. "It's 2 hours of riding. We'll rest halfway at Carson's Creek. You doing all right?" Catherine's heart hammered, but she nodded. "I'm fine." They rode north out of Laramie, the town falling away behind them as open rangeland stretched in every direction. The morning sun painted the grassland gold, and mountains rose blue and distant on the western horizon. Catherine had never seen such vast emptiness, such overwhelming space. Her body protested the unfamiliar position within the first 20 minutes. Her thighs burned, her back ached, her hands cramped from gripping the reins too tightly. But she refused to complain, refused to prove herself too delicate for this life she was considering. Thomas rode slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back to check on her, but respecting her silence. He didn't fill the quiet with unnecessary conversation, seemed comfortable with the vast soundscape of wind and hoofbeats and creaking leather. They passed other ranches, some prosperous with well-maintained buildings and fat cattle, others struggling with sagging fences and thin herds. Thomas pointed out landmarks without being asked. "That's the Morrison place. Good people, but they're fighting drought. This year. That ridge there marks the boundary of Kingsley's holdings. He's bought up most of the water rights in this valley." The comment was neutral, but Catherine caught the underlying tension. "You don't like him." "Don't know him well enough to like or dislike him as a person, but I know his business practices. He forecloses fast, doesn't give people time to recover from bad years, buys properties cheap, then rents them back at rates that keep folks trapped." Thomas adjusted his hat against the climbing sun. "A man's entitled to make profit, but there's ways to do it that don't destroy your neighbors." They reached Carson's Creek just as Catherine's legs were going numb. Thomas dismounted and came to help her down, offering his left hand for support. When her boots hit the ground, her knees buckled. Thomas caught her elbow, steadying her until her legs remembered their function. "First, long ride's always rough. Walk around some, get the blood moving. We've got 15 minutes. The creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Catherine drank from cupped hands, the water shockingly pure compared to Boston's city wells. Thomas produced hard biscuits and dried apples from his saddlebag. Simple trail food, but welcome nonetheless. "Tell me about the ranch," Catherine said, sitting on a sun-warmed boulder. "What would my actual responsibilities be?" Thomas considered the question seriously, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Cooking for 2, which isn't complicated. Keeping the house clean and organized. Managing the garden. We grow most of our vegetables, put up preserves for winter. Handling correspondence with cattle buyers. Keeping ledgers of expenses and sales. Tracking inventory of supplies so we know what needs ordering. During calving season in spring, sometimes helping with newborns if I've got my hands full, feeding orphans, that sort of thing." He paused, then added honestly, "It's not glamorous work. There's no society to speak of. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Town is a 2-hour ride, so we don't go often. Winter gets isolated. Sometimes we're snowed in for weeks. You'd need to be comfortable with solitude and your own company." "What about church? Social gatherings?" "There's a church in town, but I don't make it every Sunday. Too much work, especially during busy seasons. As for social gatherings," Thomas shrugged, "occasional barn raising or harvest celebration. Women's quilting circle meets in town once a month if you wanted to join, but mostly it's quiet, just work and land and seasons changing." Catherine absorbed this, imagining a life stripped of Boston's constant social obligations, the endless rounds of visits and teas and carefully calibrated conversations. Part of her recoiled from such isolation, but another part, a part she was just discovering, felt drawn to the simplicity of it. "And the business arrangement, you said 6 months to decide if it's working?" "That's right, though I should be clear." Thomas met her eyes directly. "I'm offering you a position as ranch manager, essentially, partner in running the operation. You'd have authority to make decisions about household matters, supplies, even some business dealings if you proved capable. I'm not looking for a housekeeper I can order around. I'm looking for someone competent who can handle half the workload so I can focus on what I do best." "Which is?" "Cattle work, fence repair, equipment maintenance, the physical labor that needs doing." He flexed his left hand. "I manage fine one-handed for most things, but some jobs need 2 hands or twice the time. Having a capable partner would make the operation sustainable long-term." They remounted and continued north. The landscape grew more rugged, rolling hills dotted with pine trees, rocky outcroppings breaking through the grassland. Catherine's body had moved past pain into a kind of numb resignation. She focused on staying upright, on matching Daisy's rhythm, on not embarrassing herself by falling off. Finally, Thomas pointed ahead. "There, that's the ranch." A small valley opened before them, a creek running through its center, timber buildings clustered on a slight rise. The house was modest, single-story, perhaps 4 rooms, with a covered porch. The barn was larger, well-maintained, with corrals spreading out from it. A vegetable garden, mostly harvested now, occupied a fenced area near the house. Beyond it all, cattle grazed across rolling pasture land, perhaps 200 head as Thomas had estimated. It was small compared to some ranches they'd passed, but it was neat, organized, clearly managed by someone who took pride in their work despite limited resources. They rode into the yard and Thomas helped Catherine dismount. Her legs barely functioned now, cramping and weak. She stood holding Daisy's saddle for support, while Thomas unsaddled both horses with practiced efficiency, working around his missing arm without apparent difficulty. "Come on, I'll show you the house first, then the rest if you're still interested." The house interior was clean but sparse, furniture clearly handmade, floors swept, dishes stacked neatly. One room served as kitchen and living area, combined, with a wood stove, rough table, and 2 chairs. A bedroom opened off to the left, simply furnished with a narrow bed and dresser. Another smaller room held supplies and tools. "That room there," Thomas pointed to a closed door. "That would be yours if you took the position. It's small, but it has a real bed and a window facing east. You'd have privacy, a lock on the door if that matters to you." Catherine opened the door to find a tiny but adequate space. A single bed with a patchwork quilt, a simple dresser, a washstand, one window looking out toward the mountains. It was monastery plain, but clean and private. More importantly, it was hers alone, not a space she'd have to share or negotiate. "The outhouse is behind the barn," Thomas continued matter-of-factly. "Water comes from the creek, but there's a pump closer to the house for drinking water. Bathing happens in a tub in the kitchen. We heat water on the stove. It's not fancy, but it's functional. He showed her the rest. The garden plot where she'd grow vegetables, the root cellar for storage, the chicken coop that needed tending, the barn where supplies were kept with surprising organization. Everything had a place. Everything was maintained, despite the obvious challenges of one-handed work. In the barn, Catherine noticed the ledger system Thomas had mentioned, notebooks tracking cattle births and deaths, purchase records, sale prices, weather patterns. The handwriting was awkward, clearly written with his non-dominant hand, but the information was thorough and methodical. You keep detailed records. Have to. Can't run a ranch on guesswork and memory. Buyers want documentation, tax assessors want proof, and I need to know if I'm making profit or slowly going broke. Thomas pulled down one ledger. This is last year's accounts. You can see what the operation looks like financially. I'm not getting rich, but I'm solvent, barely. Another bad year and I'd struggle. But with better organization, more efficiency, we could build something sustainable. Catherine studied the numbers, her father's training in systematic thinking kicking in automatically. She could see inefficiencies, places where better planning might save money or time. The seed of interest sprouted. This was a puzzle she could solve, a challenge that matched her abilities. They walked the property, Thomas explaining the operation while Catherine calculated and observed. The work was manageable, the isolation significant but not unbearable. And Thomas himself, he was respectful without being obsequious, honest without being harsh, clearly competent despite his disability. What happened to your arm? The question emerged before Catherine could stop it. I'm sorry, that's terribly rude. It's a fair question if you're considering working here. Thomas leaned against a fence post, his expression distant. War injury. Minier ball shattered the bone beyond repair. Field surgeon took it off below the elbow. I was lucky. Many men died from infections after amputations. I survived, learned to manage, came west because starting fresh seemed easier than staying where everyone knew me as I was before. Do you regret it, coming west? No. Out here, what you can do matters more than what you can't. Back home, people saw the missing arm first. Here, they see a rancher who manages his land and pays his debts. That's worth more than pity. Catherine understood that in her bones, the desire to be seen for capability rather than limitations, for what you could do rather than what you lacked. They returned to the house as afternoon shadows lengthened. Thomas made coffee, strong and bitter, and they sat at the rough table while Catherine wrestled with her decision. I need to be honest about something, she said finally. I've never done most of this work. I can keep ledgers and manage accounts. My father taught me that. But cooking for ranch work, preserving food, handling livestock, even basic cleaning beyond what servants did, I'll need to learn everything. Expected that. You're educated, organized, and smart enough to know what you don't know. That's better than most. I can teach you what needs teaching, same as you'll probably teach me better bookkeeping methods. Thomas refilled his coffee. The question isn't whether you know everything already. It's whether you're willing to learn and work hard. So are you? Catherine thought about Walter Kingsley's cold eyes and possessive hands. Thought about returning to Boston as her aunt's charitable burden. Thought about teaching school in complete isolation with no support system. Then she thought about this small ranch with its neat organization and honest work. About partnership with a man who offered respect instead of ownership. About building something sustainable through competence rather than submission. Yes, she said, I'll take the position. 6 months trial, as you suggested. Thomas nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his face. All right then, when can you start? I need 3 days to settle affairs in Laramie, close out my father's remaining accounts, collect my things, inform—" She hesitated. "Inform Mr. Kingsley that I won't be accepting his proposal." "That might not go well. Kingsley doesn't like losing." Thomas's voice held warning. "You want company for that conversation? Not to speak for you, just to be present?" The offer surprised her. Protective, without being controlling. "No, but thank you. This is something I need to handle myself." They worked out practical details. Catherine would return in 3 days. Thomas would meet her in town with the wagon. He'd pay her first month's wages up front so she could purchase any supplies she needed. They'd start the partnership on November 1st, giving them 2 months before winter truly set in to establish routines. The ride back to Laramie tested every ounce of Catherine's determination. Her body screamed protest, muscles stiffening with each mile. But she stayed upright, stayed mounted, proved to herself that she could endure physical hardship if the reward was worth it. They reached town at dusk. Thomas helped her dismount in front of the general store, steadying her when her legs nearly gave out completely. "You did well today. First long ride's brutal, but you gutted through it. That's what matters." He handed her an envelope. "First month's wages, like I promised. Buy whatever you need. Practical clothes, sturdy boots, anything that'll make the work easier. And Miss Porter," he paused, "thank you for taking a chance on this, on me. Thank you for offering it, for seeing me as capable instead of damaged goods." After Thomas rode away, Catherine limped into the general store where Helen waited with knowing eyes. "Well?" "I took the position. I start in 3 days." Helen's smile was wide and genuine. "Smart woman. Now let's get you soaking in a hot bath and figure out what supplies you'll need. Ranch work requires proper equipment." That night, submerged in hot water in Helen's private quarters, Catherine allowed herself to fully feel the day's physical toll. Everything hurt, but beneath the pain ran a thread of something unfamiliar. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction. She had ridden 4 hours on horseback, inspected a working ranch, negotiated a business partnership, and made a decision that would fundamentally alter her life's trajectory. The girl who had left Boston 2 years ago, groomed for marriage to some respectable professional, couldn't have done any of that. But the woman soaking in this tub, contemplating a future of cattle and ledgers and honest work, she was becoming someone different, someone stronger. Tomorrow she would face Walter Kingsley and end his presumptions of ownership. The confrontation would be unpleasant, but necessary. She was done being property to be acquired, whether through her father's debts or through strategic marriage proposals. Catherine Porter was choosing her own path, and it led north to a small ranch where a one-armed rancher offered partnership instead of possession. In a world that gave women few choices, she was claiming the one that offered the most valuable currency: respect. Walter Kingsley's office occupied the entire second floor of the First Territorial Bank, accessible by a polished staircase that announced wealth with every step. Catherine climbed those stairs the next morning, her resolve hardening with each footfall. She wore her best remaining dress, black mourning silk that had seen her through her father's funeral, because this conversation required armor of a sort. The banker's secretary, a nervous young man named Phillips, looked up from his desk with surprise. "Miss Porter, do you have an appointment with Mr. Kingsley?" "No, but I need to speak with him. It won't take long." Phillips disappeared into the inner office, returning moments later with an expression caught between curiosity and concern. "Mr. Kingsley will see you now." Walter Kingsley rose from behind his massive desk as Catherine entered, his smile broad and presumptuous. He was a large man, well-fed and prosperous, his clothes expensive and tailored to minimize the thickness around his middle. His graying hair was pomaded back from a high forehead, and his hands, soft, uncalloused, gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Catherine, my dear, what a pleasant surprise. I trust you've come with an answer to my proposal." She remained standing. "I have. I'm declining your offer, Mr. Kingsley. I appreciate the generosity, but I've accepted a position elsewhere that better suits my circumstances." The smile froze on his face, confusion flickering across his features before hardening into something colder. "A position? What kind of position?" "Ranch management. I'll be working with Thomas Bennett, handling household operations and bookkeeping for his property." Silence filled the office, thick and dangerous. When Walter spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "You're refusing marriage to me, marriage that would clear your father's debts, secure your future, and restore your social standing, in favor of working as a hired servant for a crippled rancher barely scraping by?" The contempt in his voice made Catherine's spine stiffen. "I'm accepting a partnership with a respected rancher who's offering fair wages and honest work." "Yes." Walter moved around the desk with predatory smoothness, positioning himself between Catherine and the door, not blocking her exit exactly, but making his physical presence felt. "Catherine, I don't think you understand your situation. Your father's debts aren't fully settled. There are contested claims I could pursue, liens I could place against any wages you earn. I've been generous in offering to absorb those obligations, but my generosity has limits." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Kingsley?" "I'm explaining reality." He stepped closer, and Catherine caught the smell of bay rum and cigar smoke. "A woman alone, without family protection, without resources. You need someone powerful looking after your interests. Bennett can't provide that. He's one bad season away from foreclosure himself. I hold the mortgage on his property, did you know that? One missed payment and I could take everything he has." The threat was clear, wrapped in the language of business concerns. Accept Kingsley's proposal or watch him destroy the man who'd offered her an alternative. Catherine forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Then I suppose Mr. Bennett had better not miss any payments. That's his concern, and mine, not yours beyond the standard banking relationship. As for my father's debts, I'll manage them. Send me the documentation of any contested claims. I'll address them through proper legal channels." "Legal channels cost money you don't have." Walter's hand came up to touch her cheek, the gesture possessive and presumptuous. "Why are you making this difficult? I'm offering you security, position, a place in society. All you need to do is be sensible." Catherine stepped back, breaking the contact. "I am being sensible. I'm choosing honest work with someone who respects me over a marriage to a man who sees me as property to acquire." The mask of civility cracked completely. Walter's face flushed dark, his jaw clenching. "You ungrateful little fool. Do you know how many women would leap at this opportunity? I'm offering you salvation and you're choosing degradation. Working for Bennett, everyone will know what that means. A young woman living alone with a bachelor rancher. Your reputation will be destroyed within a month." "My reputation is already destroyed by my father's debts and your very public proposal. At least with Mr. Bennett, I'll earn my keep through work rather than through submission." "You think he's offering you work?" Walter laughed, harsh and ugly. "He's a man, Catherine, a lonely man, isolated on a failing ranch. Whatever pretty words he used, he wants the same thing I do. The only difference is I'm honest about the transaction and willing to pay well for it." The accusation hung in the air, vile in its implications. Catherine's hands clenched into fists at her sides, fury overriding caution. "You're wrong about him, and you're wrong about me. I'm not for sale, Mr. Kingsley, not to you, not to anyone. I'm worth more than my ability to decorate a wealthy man's house and bear his name." She moved toward the door, but Walter's hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to hurt. "You'll regret this. Bennett will fail. I'll make certain of it. And when he does, when you're desperate and alone with nowhere to turn, don't come crawling back to me. This offer expires today, right now. If you walk out that door, you're choosing poverty and ruin." Catherine wrenched her arm free, ignoring the pain where his fingers had dug in. "Then I choose ruin. At least it will be mine, not something purchased with my dignity." She walked out, her legs shaking but her head high. Phillips, the secretary, stared at his desk, clearly having heard everything through the thin door. Catherine descended the polished staircase, acutely aware of Walter Kingsley's gaze boring into her back from the office window overlooking the street. Outside, she allowed herself one moment of trembling reaction before forcing her breathing to steady. Helen Crawford appeared from the general store across the street, concern etched on her face. "I saw you go in. How bad was it?" "He threatened to foreclose on Thomas Bennett if I didn't accept his proposal, called me names, grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks." Catherine pushed up her sleeve to show the already darkening bruises. "But I said no, clearly and finally." Helen's expression went cold with anger. "That man is poison, always has been. Come on, we need to document those bruises in case he tries anything legal, and you need to get word to Thomas about Kingsley's threats." They spent the next hour in Helen's back room, with Helen carefully recording the bruises, noting the time and circumstances, and having her husband witness the documentation. It felt excessive until Helen explained. "Kingsley's done this before. Had a woman he was courting who refused him. He spread rumors about her, got her fired from her teaching position, made it impossible for her to stay in town. She had to leave the territory to escape his vindictiveness. We couldn't prove anything then, but we can protect you better now with documentation." Catherine felt ice settle in her stomach. "I've made an enemy." "You've made the right choice, but yes, you've made an enemy. Kingsley doesn't forget slights, and he doesn't forgive women who refuse him." Helen sealed the documentation in an envelope. "I'll keep this safe. And I'll make sure people know the truth, that you refused him, that he threatened you, that any rumors he spreads are retaliation. Won't stop him completely, but it might limit the damage." The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Catherine purchased practical clothes with her advance wages, work dresses in sturdy cotton, leather gloves, a warm coat for winter, boots designed for function rather than fashion. She closed out her father's remaining accounts, settled the last uncontested debts, and packed her meager possessions into a single trunk. On the final evening, she stood in the empty house on Maple Street, where she'd grown up. The rooms echoed with absence, all warmth and life stripped away by creditors and death. This had been home once, filled with her mother's laughter and her father's steady presence. Now it was just empty space, soon to be sold to satisfy the last of his obligations. Catherine walked through the rooms one final time, saying goodbye to the girl she'd been, the life she'd expected. That Catherine had been sheltered and naive, convinced that education and propriety would secure her future. She had believed the world was rational and fair, that hard work and good character guaranteed reward. The woman leaving this house knew better. The world was harsh and arbitrary, full of men like Walter Kingsley who saw women as commodities. But it also held men like Thomas Bennett who offered partnership instead of ownership. And it held the possibility that she might forge her own path through competence and determination. She locked the door for the last time and walked away without looking back. Thomas arrived at dawn on the third day, driving a wagon rather than riding horseback. He helped Catherine load her trunk, his movements efficient despite working one-handed. If he noticed the bruises on her arm, faded now but still visible, he said nothing, though his jaw tightened briefly. Helen emerged from the store with a basket of supplies. Food for the journey and some things for settling in. Catherine, you write to me, you hear? Let me know how things are going. I will. Thank you, Helen, for everything. They embraced briefly, and Catherine climbed onto the wagon bench. Thomas clicked to the horses, and they rolled out of Laramie as the sun climbed above the eastern plains. The journey took longer by wagon than it had on horseback, the vehicle's weight limiting their pace. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat the bread and cheese Helen had packed. Thomas seemed content with silence, but finally spoke as they neared the halfway point. Helen sent word about Kingsley's threats, about the mortgage and his vindictiveness. His voice was calm, but Catherine caught the underlying tension. I appreciate you telling him no despite the pressure. That took courage. He said terrible things about you, about your intentions in hiring me. I'm sure he did. Kingsley sees the world through the lens of transactions and exploitation. Can't imagine someone might operate differently. Thomas adjusted the reins. For what it's worth, I meant what I said. This is a business arrangement. You'll have your privacy, your autonomy, your fair wages. If I ever make you uncomfortable or cross lines that shouldn't be crossed, you tell me directly and it stops. Your word on that is absolute. The promise settled something anxious in Catherine's chest. Thank you. I believe you. Good, because we're partners now, and partners need to trust each other. You'll be making decisions that affect the ranch's success. I need to trust your judgment, and you need to trust I won't undermine or question you without cause. They reached the ranch as afternoon sun slanted long across the valley. Thomas helped Catherine down and carried her trunk into the small bedroom that was now hers. The room looked exactly as it had 3 days ago. Simple, clean, private. Take some time to settle in. I'll handle evening chores and make supper. Tomorrow we'll start establishing routines, figuring out how to divide the work efficiently. Thomas paused in the doorway. Welcome home, Miss Porter. Home. The word resonated strangely. Catherine looked around the tiny room with its plain furniture and single window. No elegance, no luxury, nothing of what she'd been raised to expect from life. But it was hers, earned through her own choice rather than inherited or acquired through strategic marriage. In this small room with its simple bed and honest labor waiting beyond the door, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. She unpacked her trunk, hanging the few dresses in the narrow wardrobe, arranging her mother's photograph on the dresser alongside the books she'd brought. Her father's medical journals went on the floor. She'd sort through them later, decide what to keep and what to let go. Through the window she could see Thomas working near the barn, tending horses with practiced efficiency. He moved with unconscious competence, his disability simply part of how he navigated the world rather than a limitation that defined him. Catherine thought about Walter Kingsley's predictions of ruin and degradation, about the life she'd refused in his grand house with its expensive furniture and social position. Then she looked at the work-worn hands she was developing, the simple room that was entirely her own, the honest partnership she'd chosen. Let Kingsley call it ruin. Catherine was calling it freedom, and tomorrow she would start proving that a woman's worth extended far beyond her marriageability or social standing. She would prove it through ledgers and labor, through competence and determination. The wealthy banker had offered her security through submission. The one-armed rancher had offered her partnership through work. Catherine had chosen work, and she intended to show everyone, including herself, exactly what she was capable of when given the chance. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Catherine stood at her window watching darkness settle over her new home, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt something like hope take root. The first morning began before dawn. Catherine woke to the sound of Thomas moving through the house. the stove being stoked, the quiet clatter of the coffee pot. She dressed quickly in one of her new work dresses, braided her hair in a simple plait, and emerged from her room to find Thomas already heading out to the barn. "Morning, coffee's ready. I'll handle the livestock feeding. You focus on breakfast. Biscuits and bacon would be good if you can manage it. We've got a full day of work ahead." Catherine stared at the cast-iron stove with something approaching panic. She'd watched cooks prepare meals in her father's kitchen, had even helped occasionally under supervision, but she'd never been solely responsible for feeding working men who needed substantial food. She found flour, lard, and salt. The biscuit recipe her father's cook had used came back in fragments. 2 cups flour, ½ cup lard, pinch of salt, enough buttermilk to make it sticky. Or was it 3 cups flour? Her hands worked clumsily, the dough coming together in an uneven mass that looked nothing like the smooth rounds she remembered. The bacon fared better, hard to ruin meat in a hot pan, though she burned her hand reaching across the skillet and had to plunge it into the water bucket to stop the pain. When Thomas returned, the biscuits were lopsided and slightly scorched on the bottom, the bacon unevenly cooked. He surveyed the meal without comment, sat down, and ate everything on his plate. "Biscuits need more buttermilk and less handling of the dough," he said finally. "Bacon cooks better on medium heat rather than high, but it's edible, and that's what matters for the first attempt. You'll improve." The matter-of-fact assessment felt more helpful than any amount of praise or criticism. Catherine ate her own portion, cataloging what had gone wrong, already planning adjustments for tomorrow. After breakfast, Thomas laid out the day's work. "I need to ride the north fence line, check for breaks before winter. That's all day on horseback. You'll handle the house, cleaning, laundry, inventory of the pantry supplies so we know what needs ordering. There's chickens to feed, eggs to collect, and the garden needs final harvest of whatever's left. Think you can manage?" "Yes." Catherine hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. "If you need help or something goes wrong, fire 3 shots from the rifle on the porch. I'll hear it and come back. Don't hesitate if there's real trouble. A gunshot carries far out here." He showed her how to load the rifle, how to aim and fire if necessary. The weapon was heavier than Catherine expected, awkward in her unpracticed hands, but Thomas was patient, demonstrating until she could manage the basic mechanics. "Probably won't need it, but better to know and not need than need and not know. Mostly it's for scaring off coyotes if they get too close to the chickens." Then he was gone, riding north on his bay gelding, and Catherine stood alone in the ranch yard with a full day's work ahead, and only vague ideas of how to accomplish most of it. She started with the chickens because that seemed simplest. The coop held a dozen hens and 1 aggressive rooster who eyed her with suspicion. She scattered feed the way she'd seen farm wives do, collected eggs from the nesting boxes with careful hands. 1 hen pecked her wrist hard enough to draw blood, but Catherine persisted, emerging with 11 eggs cradled in her apron. The laundry proved more challenging. She knew the theory: heat water, add soap, agitate clothes, rinse, wring, hang to dry. The execution was exhausting, hauling water from the creek, heating it in batches on the stove, scrubbing stubborn dirt from work shirts and trousers. Her hands grew raw from the harsh lye soap. Her back ached from bending over the wash tub. Her arms trembled from wringing water from heavy fabric. By midday, clothes hung on lines, strung between posts, flapping in the constant Wyoming wind. Catherine's dress was soaked, her hair escaping its braid in damp tendrils, her hands red and sore. But the work was done. She made herself a simple lunch of bread and cheese, then tackled the pantry inventory. This, at least, came naturally. She created columns in a notebook Thomas had left. Item, quantity, estimated usage rate, reorder threshold, flour, beans, coffee, salt, sugar, dried beef, canned goods. She counted and recorded with the systematic precision her father had drilled into her during years of helping manage his medical supplies. By the time Thomas returned at dusk, Catherine had completed her assigned tasks, plus started supper, a simple stew that had been simmering for hours and actually smelled promising. She'd also swept the floors, organized the dish shelves, and made a list of items that needed repair or replacement. Thomas washed at the pump, came inside looking trail-worn and hungry. He surveyed the clean house, the laundry drying outside, the stew pot bubbling on the stove. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise maybe, or satisfaction. "You've been busy. Is the stew acceptable? I followed a recipe I found in one of the books on your shelf." He ladled a bowlful, tasted it carefully. "It's good, better than good. You've got instinct for cooking, just needed practice." They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for conversation. After supper, Catherine showed him her pantry inventory and supply list. Thomas reviewed it with attention that felt like respect. "This is excellent work, organized better than I've ever managed, and you're right about these items needing replacement. I've been putting them off, but they can't wait much longer." He pulled out a battered ledger. "Let me show you the budget system. We allocate funds monthly for different categories: feed, equipment, household, reserve for emergencies. You'll need to work within those constraints." They spent an hour reviewing finances, Catherine asking questions, Thomas explaining the ranch's economic reality. The operation was solvent but tight, with little margin for error. One bad season, one major equipment failure, one significant medical emergency could tip them into debt. "Kingsley's mortgage sits like a weight," Thomas admitted. "I've never missed a payment, but I've come close. Having better organization, more efficiency, that could make the difference between surviving a bad year and losing everything." Catherine studied the numbers with growing understanding. This wasn't just about cooking meals and cleaning house. Thomas was trusting her with information that revealed his vulnerability, his fears, his hopes for what partnership might accomplish. The responsibility felt heavy but also galvanizing. "I can help with this. My father taught me how to find efficiencies, how to stretch resources. It was part of running a medical practice in a town where many patients couldn't pay cash. Let me work with these ledgers, see where we might improve." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." The first week established patterns that would define their partnership. Catherine woke before dawn, started coffee, prepared breakfast while Thomas handled livestock. They ate together, planned the day's work, then separated to their respective tasks. Thomas managed physical ranch work, fence repair, cattle checking, equipment maintenance. Catherine handled household operations, bookkeeping, supply management, and gradually took on more complex responsibilities. She learned to cook over a wood stove, adjusting to its temperamental heat, discovering which dishes worked and which didn't. Her biscuits improved daily. Her stews became substantial and flavorful. She even attempted pie using dried apples, and while the crust was tough, Thomas ate 2 slices without complaint. The physical labor transformed her. Within 2 weeks, her soft hands developed calluses. Her arms grew stronger from hauling water and wringing laundry. Her back adjusted to the constant bending and lifting. The work that had left her exhausted that first day became routine, manageable, even satisfying in its completion. But the isolation pressed in during afternoon hours when Thomas was far out on the range and Catherine worked alone. The silence was profound, just wind and the occasional animal sound. No carriages passing, no neighbors calling greetings, no church bells marking time. Boston had been constant noise and activity. This was emptiness that stretched to the horizon. She fought loneliness by throwing herself into projects. She reorganized the entire house for better efficiency, rearranged the pantry for logical flow, created inventory systems that tracked usage patterns. She started a garden journal planning what to plant come spring. She read Thomas's few books in the evenings, rationing them to make them last. 3 weeks in, a cold November rain set in, lasting 3 days. Work became miserable. Mud everywhere, clothes perpetually damp, the house cold despite the stove's efforts. Thomas came in soaked each evening, his clothes heavy with water, his face lined with exhaustion. On the 3rd evening, Catherine had hot stew ready, dry clothes warming by the stove, coffee strong and steaming. Thomas peeled off his wet outer layers in the mudroom they'd designated by the door, changed into the dry clothes, and wrapped his hands around the coffee mug with something like reverence. "You're making this bearable," he said quietly. "Coming home to warmth and food and basic comfort. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing it until now." Catherine understood. She was making the house into a home, creating refuge from the harsh demands of ranch work. It wasn't romantic or grand, but it was valuable, essential even. "That's the partnership working," she replied. "You provide the structure and security. I provide the comfort and organization. Together we make something sustainable." The rain cleared on the 4th day, revealing a world washed clean and brutally cold. Winter was announcing its approach. Thomas spent the next week preparing, securing shutters, checking the roof, stacking firewood, moving cattle to sheltered pastures. Catherine preserved the last of the garden vegetables, inventoried blankets and warm clothes, calculated food supplies to see them through potential months of isolation. One afternoon, while Catherine worked on mending clothes, another skill she was developing through necessity, a rider appeared in the ranch yard. She recognized him from town, Daniel Fletcher, who ran a mid-sized spread about 10 miles east. Catherine stepped onto the porch, uncertain of protocol. Thomas was out checking cattle in the south pasture, not expected back for hours. Fletcher dismounted, his expression friendly but curious. "Afternoon, ma'am. I'm looking for Tom Bennett. Is he around?" "He's working the South Range. Can I help you with something?" Fletcher's eyes traveled over her, clearly assessing, trying to place her role. "You're Catherine Porter, aren't you? Heard you were working here now. I've got a business matter to discuss with Tom, about possibly going in together on a seed bowl come spring. When do you expect him back?" "Late afternoon, probably around dusk. You're welcome to wait, or I can give him a message." "I'll ride back another time, but Miss Porter—" Fletcher's tone shifted, became more direct. "There's talk in town about you being out here alone with Tom. Kingsley's been spreading stories, suggesting things that aren't proper. Wanted you to know so you're not blindsided by gossip." Heat flooded Catherine's face. "What kind of stories?" "That you refused his honorable marriage proposal to become Bennett's companion. He's implying the arrangement here isn't what you're claiming it is." Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "For what it's worth, most folks don't believe him. Tom's known as honest and decent, but Kingsley's got influence and his poison spreads. Just thought you should be aware." After Fletcher left, Catherine stood on the porch, fury and humiliation warring in her chest. Walter Kingsley was doing exactly what Helen had warned about, using his position to destroy her reputation because she'd refused him. When Thomas returned, she told him about Fletcher's visit and Kingsley's rumors. Thomas's jaw went tight, his eyes cold with anger. "I'll handle this. Ride to town, set the record straight." "No." Catherine's voice was firm. "That's exactly what he wants. To provoke a confrontation he can twist to his advantage. We handle it by ignoring the gossip and proving it false through our actions. Let people see that this partnership is exactly what we said it was: honest work and fair dealing." Thomas studied her, clearly wanting to fight but recognizing the wisdom in her approach. "You're right, but it galls me, him attacking your character because you wouldn't let him own you." "It galls me too, but I chose this path knowing there would be costs. I can bear gossip if it means keeping my freedom and dignity. The conversation marked a shift in their relationship, from employer and employee to genuine partners facing challenges together. They began eating supper together most evenings, discussing ranch business, sharing thoughts about improvements and concerns. Thomas explained cattle breeding and market timing. Catherine shared ideas for reducing supply costs and improving workflow. They were building something, Catherine realized, not romance, that remained firmly outside their arrangement's boundaries, but partnership, trust, the satisfaction of work well done, and challenges met together. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was becoming a life she valued. As November deepened toward December and winter's grip tightened, Catherine Porter stood in the ranch yard watching the sun set behind mountains that no longer felt foreign. Her hands were calloused, her dresses worn from work, her future uncertain in a dozen ways. But she was free, free to make decisions, to fail and learn, to prove her worth through capability rather than submission. Walter Kingsley's gossip couldn't touch that, and neither could the lingering doubts that sometimes whispered she'd made a terrible mistake. She was exactly where she chose to be, and that made all the difference. December brought snow that transformed the ranch into something from a storybook, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Catherine woke one morning to find white drifts piled against the windows, the world muffled and strange. Thomas was already up, bundled in layers, preparing to break ice on the water troughs and check on cattle huddled in the sheltered draws. "Storm's gonna get worse before it gets better," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "We might be snowed in for a week or more. You comfortable with that?" Catherine surveyed their supplies with the systematic eye she'd developed. "We have enough food for 3 weeks if we're careful. Firewood stacked should last a month. We'll manage." "Good, because once this really hits, we won't be going anywhere." He was right. By midday, the snow fell so thick Catherine couldn't see the barn from the house windows. Wind howled around the eaves, driving snow into drifts that buried fence posts and erased all landmarks. The world contracted to the small circle of house and barn, connected by a rope Thomas had strung between them so he wouldn't lose his way in the whiteout. For 3 days, the storm raged. Thomas made the dangerous journey to the barn 4 times daily, morning and evening to feed livestock, midday and late night to check on a cow showing signs of early labor. Each time Catherine stood at the window watching his dark form disappear into the white chaos, not breathing easily until she saw him return, coated in snow, face raw from wind. The enforced closeness changed their dynamic. With nowhere to go and nothing to do except necessary chores, they spent long hours in the main room, Catherine mending or reading, Thomas working on tack repair or carving new handles for tools damaged during fall work. They talked more than they had in the previous month, conversations meandering through childhood memories, thoughts on politics, opinions on books Catherine had brought from her father's library. "You never talk about the war," Catherine observed one evening, watching Thomas work leather with his left hand, the movements practiced and sure. "Beyond how you lost your arm, I mean. What it was like." Thomas's hands stilled on the leather strap he was mending. "Not much to say that hasn't been said by better men. It was brutal and necessary, and left marks on everyone who survived. I was 21 when I enlisted, thought I understood what war meant. Came home at 23 understanding nothing except that living when so many died was its own kind of burden. Do you have family back east? People who wanted you to stay?" "Parents died when I was young. Typhoid took them both the same winter. I was raised by an uncle who ran a dry goods store in Pennsylvania. Good man, but we never connected much. When I came back from the war, he wanted me to take over the business, settle into respectable commerce. But I couldn't stand being inside, couldn't stand the smallness of that life after seeing what the war showed me. Thomas resumed his work, his voice distant. Came west looking for space to breathe. Found it here. Do you ever regret it? The isolation, the constant struggle to make the ranch succeed. Every winter when I'm breaking ice at 4 in the morning. He smiled slightly. But no, not really. This land doesn't care about your past or your limitations. Only cares if you can survive and adapt. That's honest in a way society never is. Catherine understood that bone deep. Society had clear ideas about what women should be, how they should behave, what value they held. Out here, survival and capability mattered more than propriety and social grace. On the 4th day, the storm broke. Brilliant sunshine reflected off snow so bright it hurt to look at. Thomas ventured out to assess damage while Catherine tackled the indoor work that had accumulated. When he returned hours later, his expression was grim. Lost 3 head. Found them frozen in the north draw. Could have been worse, but it's still a hit we can't easily absorb. And the calving cow had trouble. I got the calf out, but it's weak. Might not make it. They spent the next week in exhausting routine. Thomas worked from before dawn to after dark, dealing with storm damage and struggling livestock. Catherine managed everything else, all the cooking, cleaning, animal care around the house, plus trying to help where she could with the cattle crisis. The orphaned calf became her special project. Thomas brought it to the barn near the house where it would be warmer and easier to tend. Catherine fed it with a bottle every few hours, even through the night, coaxing the weak creature to take nourishment. She named him Charlie, though Thomas warned her against getting attached to animals that might not survive. Can't afford sentiment on a working ranch, he said, but his voice was gentle. Death is part of this life. So is fighting for survival, Catherine countered, urging the calf to take more milk. He deserves a chance. Charlie survived, barely but stubbornly. Within 2 weeks he was strong enough to stand on shaky legs, his dark eyes bright with newfound vitality. Catherine felt absurdly proud of this small victory against winter's cruelty. Christmas came without celebration or acknowledgement. They had too much work and too little energy for anything beyond basic survival. But on Christmas evening, Catherine made a special supper, roasted chicken saved for the occasion, biscuits that actually rose properly, dried apple pie that turned out better than any previous attempt. Thomas noticed the effort. This is nice? Thank you. Everyone deserves one good meal on Christmas, even if we're too busy for proper celebration. They ate by lamplight, the windows dark beyond the small circle of warmth they'd created. Outside, temperatures dropped toward 0, but inside the house was comfortable, the stove radiating heat, the food substantial and well prepared. My first Christmas in Wyoming, Thomas said quietly. I ate hardtack and bacon in a line shack, while snow piled up outside. Thought that was as lonely as life could get. This, he gestured at the table, the clean house, Catherine sitting across from him. This is different. Better. You've made this place feel less like survival and more like living. The words settled warm in Catherine's chest. She was making a difference, contributing something valuable beyond just completing assigned tasks. The partnership was working in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. January brought a different kind of test. Thomas developed a severe cough, his chest congested, fever spiking. He tried to push through, insisting he was fine, but Catherine watched him grow weaker until he could barely stand. You're going to bed, she said firmly when he tried to head out for morning chores on the 3rd day of illness. I'll handle the livestock. You don't know? Then you'll tell me what needs doing before you collapse, because you're in no condition to work and I can't manage the ranch and nurse you if you kill yourself through stubbornness. Thomas was too sick to argue effectively. He gave her instructions in a voice gone hoarse, then retreated to his room where she could hear him coughing violently. Catherine bundled up in every warm layer she owned and ventured out to the barn. The cold was vicious, stealing breath from lungs, making every exposed inch of skin burn. She found the feed, measured portions Thomas had specified, distributed it to cattle and horses. The work took twice as long as it should have, her inexperience showing, but she managed. Back in the house, she prepared broth and forced Thomas to eat small amounts. She kept water by his bed, monitored his fever with hand on forehead like she'd seen her father do with patients. She dosed him with the medicines in their small supply, willow bark for fever, honey and whiskey for the cough. For 4 days she ran the ranch alone. Morning and evening chores, cooking and cleaning, nursing Thomas through the worst of his illness, snatching sleep in brief intervals. Her body screamed exhaustion, her hands cracked and bleeding from the cold and constant work. But she kept moving, kept the operation functioning, kept Thomas alive through the dangerous fever that could have killed him without proper care. She discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Learned she could do hard things when there was no choice but to do them, or fail. When Thomas finally improved, weak but coherent, his first words were an apology. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to manage all this alone." "That's what partnership means," Catherine said, bringing him more broth. "When one person falls, the other carries the weight. You'd do the same for me." "I would, but you just proved you can run this place without me. That you're not dependent on my labor or my decision-making. You're capable of the whole operation." Catherine sat on the edge of his bed, too tired to stand any longer. "I can manage for a few days in crisis, but this partnership works because we each bring different strengths. I couldn't do your work long-term any more than you could do mine. Together, though, we're building something neither of us could sustain alone." Thomas reached out with his left hand, squeezed her fingers briefly. "Thank you for saving my life, probably, definitely for saving the ranch." The touch was brief, appropriate, but it marked something shifting between them. Not romance. They'd been careful to maintain boundaries, but deepening trust, genuine respect, the recognition that they were becoming more than business partners. They were becoming friends, maybe even family of a sort. By February, both had recovered from winter's worst assaults. The ranch had survived with losses, but not devastation. Catherine had proven her capability in crisis. Thomas had learned to trust her judgment completely. They worked now with the smooth efficiency of a long-established partnership, anticipating each other's needs, dividing labor without discussion. Mail delivery resumed after weeks of winter isolation, and with it came news from town. Helen Crawford wrote with updates, gossip, politics, and a warning that Walter Kingsley was still actively spreading rumors about Catherine's arrangement at the Bennett Ranch. "He's telling anyone who will listen that you're living in sin," Helen wrote. "Claims the partnership story is fiction covering immoral behavior. Most people dismiss him as bitter, but some are listening. The church women's circle debated whether to formally censure you, though I shut that down by pointing out they had no evidence beyond a rejected suitor's vindictiveness. But you should know, the talk continues." Catherine showed the letter to Thomas, who read it with darkening expression. "This has gone on long enough. Maybe we should consider making the arrangement more official. Marriage in name would silence the gossips, protect your reputation. Marriage to solve a social problem? That's barely better than Walter Kingsley's business proposition. It would be different. We'd maintain the same partnership terms, separate rooms, shared work, fair wages, just with legal protection and social respectability added." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "I'm not proposing romance or demanding anything beyond what we already have. Just offering a solution to the reputation problem that's causing you harm." Catherine considered it. Marriage in name only, maintaining their current arrangement but with legal standing. It would silence gossips, protect her from Kingsley's worst attacks, maybe even strengthen their business partnership through formal recognition. But it would also close doors, eliminate future possibilities. She'd be married, even if only technically. And while she respected Thomas, valued their partnership, even cared about him as a friend, was that enough foundation for permanent legal binding? "Let me think about it," she said finally. "It's a generous offer, but one with serious implications. I need time to consider." "Of course, no pressure. The offer stands whenever you're ready to decide." That night, Catherine lay in her small room listening to wind rattle the shutters, thinking about choices and consequences. 6 months ago, she'd rejected Walter Kingsley's proposal of real marriage with financial security. Now she was considering Thomas Bennett's proposal of nominal marriage with continued partnership. The difference was respect. Thomas offered choice and autonomy. Kingsley had offered control and possession. One felt like freedom, the other like cage with gilded bars. But was convenience enough reason for marriage, even nominal marriage? Catherine had spent 3 months proving she could survive independently, could build a life through her own capability. Did she need the protection of a man's name, even one offered without strings? The question kept her awake long into the night, no closer to answers when exhaustion finally pulled her under. Outside, winter maintained its grip on the land, harsh and unforgiving. But inside the small ranch house, warmth held against the cold, proof that partnership and determination could create refuge, even in the most difficult circumstances. Whether that partnership needed the formalization of marriage remained an open question. One Catherine would need to answer before spring brought new challenges and the return of connection to the wider world beyond their isolated valley. March arrived with false promises of spring, warm days that melted snow into rushing creeks, followed by freezing nights that turned mud into treacherous ice. The cattle, restless after winter confinement, needed constant monitoring. Catherine had learned enough about ranch operations to be genuinely helpful now, spotting problems Thomas might miss, making decisions about resource allocation that proved sound. One afternoon, while Thomas worked on repairing winter-damaged fence in the east pasture, a well-dressed rider approached the ranch. Catherine recognized him from town, James Morrison, the lawyer who'd helped settle her father's estate. His presence here, unannounced, set alarm bells ringing. "Miss Porter." Morrison dismounted, his expression uncomfortable. "I apologize for arriving without notice, but the matter is urgent. May we speak privately?" Catherine led him into the house. Offering coffee, he declined. Morrison pulled papers from his leather case with the reluctance of someone delivering bad news. "I'll be direct. Walter Kingsley has filed a claim against you for fraudulent evasion of debt obligations. He's alleging that your father owed him personally for medical services rendered, that you as heir are liable for repayment, and that you deliberately concealed assets to avoid settlement." Catherine's stomach dropped. "That's absurd. All of my father's debts were settled. Samuel Hartley handled everything properly." "The claim is legally questionable, but Kingsley has influence with the territorial judge. He's demanding either full payment of $1,500, a fabricated amount in my opinion, or he's threatening to seize any wages you've earned and pursue claims against Thomas Bennett for harboring a debtor." "He can't do that. I'm working legally, earning honest wages. Technically, he can tie up your wages in court for months while the claim is adjudicated, and he can make Bennett's life extremely difficult through banking pressure. Kingsley holds the mortgage on this property. He could call it due, demand immediate full payment, force foreclosure." Morrison's voice was grim. "This is harassment disguised as legal action, but harassment with teeth." Catherine's hands clenched in her lap. This was Walter Kingsley's revenge for rejection, executed with the weapons available to wealthy, vindictive men. What are my options? Fight it in court, which will cost money you don't have, and take months you can't spare. Pay the fraudulent claim, which rewards his intimidation, or— Morrison hesitated. Give him what he actually wants, your submission in whatever form he'll accept. Never. The word came out flat and absolute. Then you fight and you prepare for him to make things very difficult. Morrison gathered his papers. I'll represent you without fee. Your father was a good man, and this injustice offends me. But you should know that Kingsley has done this before. He uses the legal system as a weapon against people who can't afford prolonged battles. He's counting on you giving up rather than fighting. After Morrison left, Catherine sat alone in the quiet house, fury and fear warring in her chest. She'd worked so hard to build independence, to prove her capability, to create a life on her own terms. And now Kingsley was using his wealth and influence to destroy it all because she'd refused to be owned by him. When Thomas returned at dusk, she told him everything. His expression went cold with controlled anger. He's coming after me through you. Knows attacking you directly is easier than coming at me head on. Thomas paced the small room, his movements sharp with frustration. If he calls the mortgage due, I can't pay it all at once. I'd lose everything, the land, the cattle, 5 years of work building this operation. I should leave, take away his leverage over you. If I'm not here, he has no reason to— No. Thomas stopped pacing, faced her directly. That's exactly what he wants. To isolate you, remove your support system, make you vulnerable. We fight this together as partners. But the ranch matters less than doing what's right. I won't let him win through intimidation. Thomas's jaw set with determination. And I have an idea. It's not perfect, but it might protect us both. Catherine waited, her heart hammering. We get married, legally properly. Your debts become mine, which means they're secured against property he can't easily seize without lengthy court proceedings. As my wife, you'd have legal protections, and— He met her eyes steadily. It would eliminate his primary weapon. Can't claim impropriety in a legitimate marriage. It was the same offer from months ago, but now, with urgency driving it, Catherine stood, moved to the window overlooking the darkening valley. Marriage as legal strategy, protection wrapped in vows. Not romance, not love, just practical defense against a man who wielded power without conscience. You'd be tying yourself to my problems permanently, taking on debt that isn't yours, limiting your own future options. My future options look pretty limited if Kingsley forecloses and takes everything I've built. At least this way we both have fighting chance. Thomas came to stand beside her, his reflection visible in the window glass. I'm not proposing because I expect anything from you beyond what we already have. Same partnership, same respect for your autonomy, just with legal protection added. Catherine thought about the past 4 months, the work they'd done together, the trust they'd built, the way they'd learned to function as a unit. Thomas had never once made her feel obligated or indebted. He'd treated her as a true equal, valued her contributions, respected her boundaries completely. Marriage to him wouldn't be a cage, like it would have been with Kingsley. It would be a choice, a strategy, a partnership formalized for mutual protection. All right, she said quietly, but on one condition. We draw up a legal contract specifying the terms, separate finances beyond joint ranch operations, mutual dissolution rights if either party wants out, clear delineation of responsibilities and expectations. I won't enter any marriage, even strategic, without protection of my own. Thomas nodded slowly. Fair enough. We'll have Morrison draft something proper. Make sure you're protected legally, not just socially. They were married 3 weeks later in the ranch house, with Morrison serving as witness, and Helen Crawford standing beside Catherine in lieu of family. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, vows exchanged without flourish, rings purchased from the general store for practicality rather than sentiment. Catherine wore her best dress, dark green wool that served for both work and special occasions. Thomas wore his town suit, looking uncomfortable in formal clothes but steady in his commitment. They spoke the required words, signed the legal documents Morrison had prepared, and became husband and wife under territorial law. Afterward, Helen hugged Catherine fiercely. "I know this isn't a love match, but you've chosen well. Thomas Bennett is 10 times the man Kingsley could ever be." "I know, that's why I said yes." Morrison delivered copies of the marriage certificate to the courthouse and personally informed Walter Kingsley of the union. According to Morrison's later report, Kingsley had gone white with fury, but there was nothing he could legally do. The debt claim against Catherine Porter was moot. She was now Catherine Bennett, her finances merged with her husband's, the claim suddenly requiring action against Thomas's property, which would expose Kingsley's vindictive motives too clearly. "He threatened me," Morrison said when he returned with the news. "Said I'd regret helping you, that he'd make sure I never got another banking client in the territory. But his teeth are pulled. The marriage protects you both, at least from his current attack. He'll look for other openings, but for now, you've outmaneuvered him." That evening, Catherine and Thomas sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They were married now, legally bound, but nothing about their daily arrangement had changed. Catherine still had her small bedroom, her independence, her equal voice in ranch decisions. Thomas still treated her with the same respect, never presuming the marriage gave him rights beyond what they'd explicitly agreed to. "Do you regret it?" Thomas asked quietly, "marrying for strategy rather than love?" Catherine considered the question honestly. "No, because I chose it freely, and I chose a partner who respects my choice. That's more than most women get from marriage, even ones that start with romance. If you ever want more or less or different from this arrangement, you tell me. The contract Morrison drew up protects your right to dissolve this if it stops working for you." "I know. That's why I'm not afraid of it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered. Somewhere in town, Walter Kingsley was probably still fuming, plotting new attacks, looking for weakness to exploit. But here on the ranch, Catherine felt safer than she had in months, protected not by a man's ownership, but by genuine partnership with someone who valued her capability. The marriage announcement appeared in the Laramie newspaper the following week. Brief notice that Thomas Bennett and Catherine Porter had been wed at the Bennett Ranch. Helen reported that the gossip circles exploded with speculation, but the vindictive edge had dulled. Marriage, even sudden marriage, was respectable. Kingsley's rumors about impropriety lost their sting. Some women from the church circle even visited, bringing small gifts, offering stiff congratulations. Catherine received them with polite grace, served tea and simple refreshments, answered questions about ranch life with careful honesty. She saw their curiosity, their judgment barely concealed, but also their grudging respect. She'd survived scandal, made an unconventional choice, and emerged legally respectable. "You've managed something remarkable," Mrs. Harrison, the minister's wife, said as the women prepared to leave. "Independent women usually end up destitute or dependent on charity. You've built yourself a partnership instead. It's unusual but admirable in its way." After they left, Catherine cleaned up the tea things with mixed feelings. She'd won acceptance, but at the cost of conformity. The marriage made her respectable in society's eyes, even though the actual substance of her life, working alongside Thomas as equal partner rather than submissive wife, would shock these same women if they understood it clearly. But perhaps that was the victory, appearing conventional while living radically, meeting society's surface expectations while creating something entirely different underneath. Catherine had found a way to have both freedom and respectability, or at least the appearance of respectability, that kept society from attacking too viciously. Spring work intensified as calving season arrived. Catherine found herself spending long hours in the barn, helping with difficult births, bottle-feeding orphans, tracking which calves belonged to which mothers. The work was exhausting and sometimes heartbreaking. Several calves didn't survive despite their best efforts, but also deeply satisfying. She was contributing meaningfully to the ranch's success, not just managing the household, but actively involved in the core business. Thomas taught her how to read cattle behavior, how to spot problems before they became crises, how to make quick decisions in emergencies. She proved an apt student, her systematic mind adapting well to the patterns of animal husbandry. One night, working side by side in the barn with a struggling cow, they finally got the calf delivered, a strong bull calf who came out fighting. Catherine sat back on her heels, exhausted and covered in blood and birth fluids, and laughed with pure relief. Thomas looked at her, took in her disheveled state and glowing expression, and smiled. "You look like a proper rancher now." "I feel like one. Finally." Catherine stood, her body protesting but her spirit soaring. "This is real work, Thomas. Work that matters, that produces something tangible. I've never felt more useful or more capable." "You are capable, more than you probably realize." He reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, the gesture casual and friendly. "Thank you for choosing this, for choosing partnership with me over easier options. Thank you for making it possible, for seeing me as worthy of partnership instead of just employment or charity." They stood in the barn, surrounded by the warm smell of cattle and hay, the newborn calf nursing contentedly from its mother, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romantic love that remained undefined and unexplored, but something equally valuable. Recognition of each other's worth, gratitude for the partnership they'd built, satisfaction in shared accomplishment. Catherine Bennett, no longer Porter, had found something she'd never expected when that telegram arrived months ago, announcing her father's death. She'd found purpose, capability, and a life built on her own terms through work and determination. The cost had been high. Reputation damaged, gossip endured, strategic marriage to protect herself from a vindictive man's attacks. But the rewards were higher. Freedom to make decisions, respect earned through competence, partnership with someone who valued her contributions. She'd rejected the wealthy banker's ownership and chosen the one-armed rancher's respect. And that choice was proving itself right with every passing day. Spring was coming, bringing new challenges and opportunities, but Catherine felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing she had the skills, the support, and the determination to not just survive but thrive in this harsh, beautiful land she was learning to call home. Summer arrived with a ferocity that made winter seem merciful in comparison. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, turning the grasslands brittle and brown. Water became the constant concern, keeping cattle hydrated, maintaining the garden, rationing their own use. Catherine developed a routine of rising even earlier to complete heavy work before the sun reached its brutal peak. The ranch was thriving despite the heat. Spring calving had been successful. They'd lost fewer calves than average, adding healthy stock to their herd. The garden Catherine had planted in April was producing abundantly, and she spent long hours preserving vegetables for winter, the kitchen unbearably hot from the canning process, but the work essential. One afternoon in late July, Thomas returned from town with news that drained the color from Catherine's face. Walter Kingsley had suffered a massive stroke. He was alive but incapacitated, his empire suddenly in chaos as relatives and business partners scrambled to control his assets. Morrison says the mortgage on this place is being called in by Kingsley's nephew, who's trying to liquidate properties quickly to pay off the old man's personal debts. Thomas explained, his voice tight. We have 60 days to pay the full amount, $8,000, or we lose everything. Catherine's mind raced through their finances. They'd saved money, yes, but not $8,000, not even close. How much do we have? Maybe $3,000 if we sell everything we can spare. Still $5,000 short. Thomas sat heavily at the table, defeat written across his features. 5 years of work, and it ends because Kingsley's nephew needs cash fast. There has to be another way, another bank we could borrow from, another buyer for cattle. Every bank in the territory knows Kingsley's nephew is calling loans. They're all protecting their own interests, not taking on new risk. Thomas looked at her with something like desperation. Unless you still have connections in Boston. Your aunt, maybe, anyone who might lend. My aunt has barely enough to support herself. She made that clear when she took me in. Catherine paced the small kitchen, her mind working furiously. What about selling part of the land? Keep the core operation, but sell off acreage we don't actively use. Land sales take months. We have 60 days. They sat in heavy silence, the weight of impending loss crushing. Everything they'd built together, the partnership, the improvements, the carefully developed systems, all of it about to be destroyed by financial machinations completely beyond their control. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. An elegant carriage pulled into the ranch yard, and from it emerged a woman Catherine recognized from the territorial fair, Abigail Thornton, wife of one of Denver's most successful cattle brokers. Mrs. Bennett, Abigail said, extending her hand with genuine warmth. I hope you'll forgive the unannounced visit. My husband and I heard about your mortgage situation. We'd like to discuss a business proposition. Over coffee in the simple kitchen, Abigail explained. Her husband's operation needed a reliable source of quality cattle and a regional partner who understood Wyoming ranching. They'd been impressed by the stock Thomas and Catherine had shown at the fair, even more impressed by Catherine's business acumen and negotiation skills. We're prepared to offer a partnership arrangement, Abigail said, pulling papers from her case. We'll pay off your mortgage in exchange for a 40% stake in the ranch and exclusive contracts for your cattle output. You maintain operational control, we provide capital and market access. It's beneficial for everyone. Thomas and Catherine exchanged glances. It would mean sharing ownership, giving up some independence, but it would also mean survival, growth, security against future financial attacks. We'll need to review the terms carefully, Catherine said, her business mind already analyzing angles. But the concept interests us. They spent 3 days negotiating details with Abigail and her husband Robert. Catherine proved herself a formidable bargainer, securing terms that protected their operational independence while accepting the capital infusion. Thomas contributed his knowledge of ranching realities, ensuring the production expectations were realistic. The final contract gave the Thorntons 35% ownership. Catherine had negotiated down from 40% in exchange for paying off the mortgage and providing a $10,000 operating capital fund. The Bennetts maintained full operational control, with the Thorntons receiving quarterly reports and annual profit sharing. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Bennett, Robert Thornton said with respect as they signed the papers. My wife told me you were sharp. She undersold you. I protect what's mine, Catherine replied simply. This ranch represents too much work to give away more than necessary. After the Thorntons left, Catherine and Thomas stood in the ranch yard watching dust settle from the departing carriage. They'd survived another existential threat, but this time through negotiation rather than just endurance. "You saved us," Thomas said quietly. "I would have been lost in that negotiation, would have accepted their first terms just to avoid losing everything. We saved us. Your knowledge made sure the production terms were realistic. My business, training made sure we weren't exploited." Catherine turned to face him. "That's what partnership means, using both our strengths." Thomas reached out and, for the first time, pulled her into a full embrace. Catherine stiffened briefly from surprise, then relaxed into it. His arm was strong around her, his heartbeat steady against her ear. It wasn't romantic, or maybe it was starting to be, in ways neither had anticipated or planned. But mostly it was comfort, connection, shared relief at surviving another crisis together. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, "for choosing this life, for choosing me. Thank you for making it a choice worth making." August brought a letter that changed everything again. It was addressed to Catherine, written in elegant script she didn't recognize. Inside was an offer from Abigail Thornton, not for the ranch, but for Catherine personally. "Robert and I are expanding operations," Abigail wrote. "We need someone to manage our Wyoming regional office, overseeing contract ranches, negotiating purchases, handling all business operations for the territory. The position pays $200 monthly plus his expenses. It would require you to relocate to our Laramie office, though you'd travel frequently to ranches throughout the region. I believe you have exactly the skills we need, and this would be an opportunity to build something significant beyond one ranch's boundaries." Catherine read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. $200 monthly, more money than she'd imagined earning. A position of real authority, using her skills at the highest level. Recognition of her business abilities that went far beyond managing one small operation, but it would mean leaving the ranch, leaving Thomas. She showed him the letter that evening. He read it slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "This is an incredible opportunity," he said finally, "the kind of position women almost never get access to. You'd be foolish not to consider it seriously. It would mean dissolving our partnership, our marriage. The marriage was always strategic. If you have a better opportunity, one that uses your full potential." Thomas set the letter down carefully. "I won't hold you to a bargain we made under duress." Catherine studied his face, trying to read what he wasn't saying. "Would you want me to stay if there wasn't this offer? If things just continued as they have been?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I'd want you to stay because you wanted to stay, not because you lacked options or felt obligated. That's the difference between partnership and possession." "You're not answering the question." "Yes." The word came out rough. "Yes, I'd want you to stay, because in the past 8 months, you've become the most important person in my life, because I wake up grateful you're here and go to sleep, hoping you'll still be here tomorrow, because somewhere along the way, this strategic marriage became real for me, even if we kept pretending it wasn't." Catherine's breath caught. "Thomas, but that's my feeling, not your obligation. You need to choose what's right for you, not what makes me happy. That's what real partnership means, supporting each other's growth even when it's difficult." Catherine walked out onto the porch, the letter still in her hand, Thomas's words echoing in her mind. The stars spread vast overhead, the same stars she'd watched that first night when everything was terrifying and unknown. She thought about the position Abigail offered: prestige, money, power in business circles. She thought about the woman she'd been in Boston, groomed for decorative marriage and social position. She thought about who she'd become here: capable, strong, essential. The ranch had taught her she could do hard things, had proven she was worth more than her marriageability or social standing. But maybe the real lesson wasn't that she needed to stay here to prove her worth. Maybe it was that she could succeed anywhere, in any role that used her full capabilities. But did she want to succeed alone? Or was there value in partnership beyond just survival and efficiency? Thomas came out to stand beside her, not touching, but present. Whatever you decide, I'll support it, even if it means ending our marriage and partnership. You deserve to choose your own path, always. Catherine looked at him. This man who'd given her a chance when she was desperate, who'd treated her with respect when others saw only scandal, who'd offered partnership when the world demanded submission. She thought about what they'd built together, not just in ranch improvements and business success, but in trust and friendship and something deeper that neither had quite named. The position Abigail offered is remarkable, she said slowly. A year ago, I would have taken it without hesitation. But a year ago, I didn't understand what real partnership felt like. I didn't know I could build something with another person that was bigger than what either of us could create alone. She turned to face Thomas fully. That letter doesn't offer partnership. It offers independence and success, but alone. I've had alone. I've proven I can survive and thrive by myself. But what we have here, working together, building together, facing challenges as a team, that's rarer, more valuable. You're choosing to stay. I'm choosing us, the partnership we've built. Not because I lack options or feel trapped, but because what we've created together matters more than individual success. Catherine reached for his hand. But I need to know this is real for you too. Not strategic anymore, not just convenient. Real. Thomas pulled her close, and this time the embrace was unmistakably romantic. When he kissed her, it was with months of restrained feeling finally released, gentle but passionate, respectful but claiming. When they parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. It's real. It's been real for months, but I didn't want to pressure you or make you feel obligated by our legal marriage. I kept waiting for you to decide what you wanted. I want this. I want us. I want to keep building what we started, but as genuine partners in every sense. Not strategic marriage, but real marriage. Not business arrangement, but actual commitment. They stood on the porch, holding each other as stars wheeled overhead, and the ranch settled into night sounds around them. In the morning, Catherine would write to Abigail declining the position, but thanking her for the recognition. She would continue managing ranch operations, but now with the understanding that she was choosing to stay rather than staying because she had no choice. The difference mattered. Choice always mattered. September brought changes that reflected their evolved relationship. Thomas added onto the house, converting Catherine's small room into an office while they began sharing the larger bedroom. The physical intimacy developed naturally, without awkwardness, built on the foundation of months of emotional intimacy and trust. Walter Kingsley died in October, his stroke having destroyed what the illness didn't. Catherine felt no satisfaction at his death, only relief that his vendetta had finally ended. His nephew wrote apologizing for the mortgage crisis, explaining the old man had given explicit instructions to destroy Thomas Bennett and Catherine Porter even from his deathbed. The nephew had simply been executing those final vindictive wishes. He died bitter and alone, Thomas observed when they heard. While we're here, together, having built something good, that's justice enough. The year ended with the ranch more prosperous than ever. The Thornton partnership provided stability and growth opportunities. Catherine's business skills had opened doors to contracts and arrangements Thomas could never have accessed alone. Together they were creating something significant, not just a surviving ranch, but a thriving operation with regional influence. On Christmas Eve, they sat before the fire in their expanded house, truly their house now, truly their home. Catherine was pregnant early enough that they'd told no one yet, but the knowledge sat warm and precious between them. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders. Catherine considered the question seriously, as she always did. She thought about the terrified woman who'd stood in the empty Laramie house 10 months ago, facing impossible choices with no good options. She thought about the journey from desperate acceptance of a business arrangement to genuine partnership to real love. "I'm happy," she said, "not because everything is perfect or easy, but because I chose this, because I rejected the wealthy banker who wanted to own me, and chose the one-armed rancher who treats me like royalty not through gifts or status, but through respect and partnership and genuine caring." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "You rejected wealth and chose work. That took remarkable courage. I rejected possession and chose partnership. That took learning to value myself correctly." Catherine looked around their warm home, thought about the life growing inside her, considered the future stretching ahead, full of challenges and possibilities. "Walter Kingsley offered me security through submission. You offered me respect through partnership. I chose respect, and it gave me everything: security, love, purpose, and freedom. No regrets? None. This life is harder than what Kingsley offered, but it's mine in ways that Gilded Cage never could be. I built this through my own capability, with a partner who values what I bring. That's worth more than all his money." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low and Christmas approached. Outside, Wyoming winter held the land in its grip, but inside, warmth and love and hard-won happiness created refuge against any cold. Catherine had rejected the wealthy banker who saw her as property to acquire. She'd chosen the one-armed rancher who treated her like royalty, not through wealth or status, but through the only currency that mattered: respect for her full humanity, recognition of her complete worth, and partnership built on equality rather than submission. She'd made the right choice, the brave choice, the choice that honored who she was rather than who society said she should be. And as Thomas held her close and the baby grew within her, and the ranch they'd built together stood solid against winter's challenges, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she'd found something money couldn't buy and status couldn't grant: a life built on her own terms with a partner who valued her exactly as she was. That was true royalty, and it was worth everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.